The last station in the turret is the loader. Again, very cramped. I'm standing on the floor, my head's on top of the hatch. He has no periscopes in this hatch, he has no periscopes at all. In fact, the only way he can see out is there's a tiny little port in the rear of the tank. So all he can do is, if there's a lull in the fighting, he has a seat behind me here, folds up and down in the same way as the commander. He can sit down and look out the open hatch, which I should add was actually something of a narrow fit for me to get into. Ammunition is stored pretty much around. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 ready rounds directly behind the gun. There's another 11 or 12 underneath the gun. Because the ammunition is so small, it's actually pretty one-handed loading basically. You just pick it up and slam it in, or sometimes you could also use your right hand and push it in that way. I've seen both. There is a canvas bag for catching the empty shell casings. He of course also has the job of care and feeding of the coaxial beta. Not much else in here. I'll try to give an impression of how small this is. I strongly suspect the internal volume of this turret is smaller than that of a Stuart, of an M5 Light, but a Stuart is only a 2-man turret. So that probably puts things into perspective. Again, I'm glad I wasn't around in the 40s. I would have probably not enjoyed being a tanker as much as I do today in the 21st century. I do believe a fire extinguisher would have gone here. And he has his own intercom set, mount for the radio antenna, and that's it. Driver's hall. I thought this place was cramped. Let's see what that one's like. So these two devices down here that look suspiciously like they were taken off a bicycle brake handle, they are connected to the smoke projectors on the far side of the turret wall. So squeeze inwards and off goes your smoke grenade. If you're wondering how the driver's hatch worked on Matilda, that was it. It was a rolling system that just levers forward. There's a handle on each side, and that's it. I think I'm in the up position, at least I certainly hope I am, but I can't figure out how to load a seat. Go figure. Anyway, for viewing, he has, again, a rotatable and adjustable in elevation periscope. And in case this goes down, he does have behind this armored cover here a direct vision slit. It's actually a lot smaller than it looks like. It's a small grate, as you can see, even behind the armored cover. And of course, his last option is to do exactly what I'm doing right now, is to drive. We can head out. So ordinarily when I do one of these tours, I sit in the driver's hole and I start pointing at things. Unfortunately, this one particular vehicle is so lacking in camera accessibility. I guess they weren't thinking about that at the time. There's not really very much for this, except I'm going to have to get out, lie on the front step and start pointing at things with my hands from the outside. It's the only way to get the camera and the items in at the same time. Just while I am here, you can see the driving position with the two steering laterals, and right in the middle is where the gear selector is. And I have two pedals, one accelerator, one gear change. Not a clutch, it's a gear change. Okay, as we're climbing around on the outside of this tank, I should re-emphasize how many times we've nearly fallen off it. This is not a vehicle designed for staying on in dry weather, let alone wet. So anyway, the cameraman is inside the driver's hole, so we're going to start him off looking off at the bottom left corner, just under his left shoulder, for lack of a better term, which is where the electrical junction box is. At the very bottom of that is going to be the master power, and that is a simple handle right at the very bottom. We have headlight switches, main headlight, headlight UV it says, which I presume is ultraviolet. There are two little boxes on the outside, I suspect that could be it. There's tail lights and a couple of other electrical things that I can't actually read. The batteries, incredibly corroded. There's two on each side by the hull. You can see how the hull slants inward because of that V shape that it has. Up on the top, there's one of the two handles to rotate the driver's hood forward for protection. Just underneath that, you have a nice big red round button. Sorry, not red. Just underneath that, you have a nice round button called klaxon. You have two guesses what that does. What the handle to the left does, I have not yet figured out. There is a clock. Just if you want to know what time it was. And it seems to be a wind-up type. To the front then is where we have the periscope, which will elevate and rotate, like so. And to the right is that direct vision that I'd mentioned. Speedometer right here. Interesting way of the dial circulating around. Looks like it's got 854 miles on the clock. The gear change is right in the middle, and it's 5 speeds forward, there's an EL, and there is a reverse. Now the thing about this is a pre-selector. People that drove Route Master buses for London bus will be familiar with the concept, or if you own a Ferret armoured car. The idea behind this is that you select whichever gear you want to be in first. Then when you need the gear, you depress the gear change pedal. It's the one on the left, it is not a clutch. You don't use it as a clutch. When you do, what happens when you press that is it will then change the gear to whatever setting your gear shift lever is currently in. The big pedal on the right, however, that's simple enough, that's an accelerator. Going further around to the right, we have another instrument panel, one for each engine. So going top to bottom, you got engine temperature, engine pressure, and finally the fuel tank gauges. Yet more corroded batteries. Obviously this tank is not driven in a very long time, needs a little bit of work. Further to the right and above the corroded batteries is the engine air pressure gauge, and that is what is used to traverse the turret. Once the pressure gauge was in the correct setting, then the gunner was in a position to actually traverse the turret. So this little red item under here is the escape hatch. Now, I could not see the escape hatch when I was in the driver's seat. I could not see the escape hatch when I was lying on the front slope looking down, looking for the escape hatch. So I have absolutely no idea how it was that you were supposed to be able to escape through the escape hatch. And not least, you don't have a whole hell of a lot of ground clearance either. So that's why egressing through the turret was usually the better option, and that's why you had the whole spiel of the gunner leaving the turret traverse at a certain setting, and then the driver could run the engine to spin the turret round so that he could then get out through the turret, out the roof. Yeah, not the best design. Matilda was a vehicle designed for a set specification, and it did that one thing, which was to have lots of armour, well, at least 3 inches, and a 40mm gun. There was no room for upgradability. You couldn't mount a bigger gun, you couldn't add more armour, you couldn't make it go faster. Well, at least not much faster. As a result, when the last production orders were placed in 42, the tank was already pretty hopelessly obsolete, and the last ones were built in 1943. You probably wouldn't want to be the guy who received it. That said, the vehicle did still see service in East Asia, particularly with the Australians. They rather liked the thing. I don't know if it was the name or other features, but the Aussies did a bunch of modifications, including rocket launchers, flamethrowers, and what have you. So Matilda was actually one of 3 vehicles that were in production at the beginning of the war and were still in service at the end of it. The other 2 were T-34 and Panzer IV. That was Matilda. I hope you found it interesting, and we'll see you again on the next one.